civilization vanished, leaving behind cities more orderly than our own. Over 4,000 years ago, the people of the Indus Valley built metropolises with grid-patterned streets, sophisticated drainage, and uniform homes, achieving a level of urban planning that would not be seen again for. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how this ancient society created a blueprint for modern living and why its mysterious disappearance still haunts us today. We will uncover how they managed water with precision, rivaling modern engineers, and ask why a society so advanced left no monuments to kings or gods. What does the silence of a lost world tell us about our own? The story begins in the rich soil of a river valley, a cradle of life for countless cultures. Around 2,600 years before the Common Era, a remarkable transformation was along the banks of the Indus River. Small farming villages began to connect, their populations swelling, their ambitions growing. What emerged was not just another ancient kingdom, but a civilization of staggering scale and unity, stretching across northwest India. This was a society contemporary with the pyramid builders of Egypt and the ziggurat raisers of Mesopotamia, yet it followed a completely different blueprint. The world remained unaware of its grandeur until the early 1920s, when archaeologists began peeling back the sands of time. What they uncovered at sites like Harappa and sent shockwaves through the historical community. Here were cities that appeared to have been planned with a ruler and a set of instructions, constructed with an orderly vision from their very first brick. This was not a settlement that grew organically and chaotically over centuries. It was a conscious creation, a deliberate act of collective will that speaks to a level of social organization we are still striving to fully comprehend. The mystery is baked into the foundation stones themselves. What kind of society chooses perfect right angles and standardized bricks over monuments to power? The answer lies in walking the streets they left behind. Walking those streets today, you would not feel lost. The layout of Harappa is immediately, strikingly familiar to the modern mind. Their most defining feature was a masterful grid, a network of streets laid out with a draftsman's precision long before the first foundation was dug. Unlike the winding, chaotic lanes that grew from medieval towns, or even the grand ceremonial avenues focused on temples and palaces in other ancient cultures, the Indus cities were built on a principle of pure, pragmatic order. Main thoroughfares, some over 30 feet wide, ran straight as arrows in precise north-south and east-west orientations. These major arteries intersected at perfect right angles, carving the city into uniform, rectangular blocks. This was not an accident of gradual expansion. This was a conscious, sweeping act of urban design, executed on a scale that required foresight we still struggle to fully appreciate. Imagine the coordination needed. Teams of surveyors would have had to meticulously plot these lines across empty land, using simple tools to achieve astonishing accuracy. Ensuring that a street begun on one side of the city would meet its counterpart on the other, decades or even generations later. This points to a powerful, centralized authority, not necessarily a king in the traditional sense, but a governing body with the vision and the sustained power to enforce a single architectural plan over centuries. The purpose was profoundly practical. This grid facilitated everything. It allowed for the efficient movement of people and goods, turning the city into a predictable, manageable space. It trade as merchants could navigate from district to district without confusion. It may have even aided in administrative control, as the orderly blocks made census taking or resource distribution far easier. But perhaps its most revolutionary aspect was its egalitarian nature. The wide streets and clear layout served every citizen, from the artisan to the merchant, creating a shared urban experience based on ease and accessibility. This foundational commitment to collective well-being through smart design finds its most brilliant expression in how these cities handled the most vital resource of all. A system that flowed silently beneath those perfectly straight streets. Beneath those perfectly straight streets, the true genius of the Indus Valley was hidden from view. Their crowning achievement was not a towering monument, but a network of tunnels, a vast and intricate sanitation system that served as the lifeblood of their cities. In nearly every excavated home, from larger courtyard houses to more modest dwellings, archaeologists have found a dedicated bathroom, complete with a brick floor that sloped toward a corner drain. This was not a rare luxury, but a standard feature as common as a front door. Each of these private drains connected to a larger network of brick-lined channels that ran beneath the streets, carefully covered with stone slabs or bricks. These channels were masterfully designed, using the natural slope of the land to guide by gravity away from residential areas and into larger, covered sewer mains. The system even included something remarkably modern: inspection manholes at regular intervals, allowing for maintenance and clearing of blockages. Solid waste was directed into brick cesspits, which could be periodically cleaned out, a practice that prevented contamination of the main water supply. This was a comprehensive, municipally planned infrastructure, reflecting a societal priority that seems astonishingly modern, an extraordinary concern for public health and collective well-being. For a population living in close quarters, this commitment to hygiene would have been transformative. By managing waste effectively and separating it from living spaces and water sources, these cities likely dramatically reduced the spread of waterborne illness, allowing a large, dense urban population to thrive in a way that was simply not possible elsewhere in the ancient world. While other great civilizations built pyramids and palaces, the Indus Valley invested in the health of its people, creating a standard of urban living that would not be seen again until the height of the Roman Empire. Thousands of years later, this raises a profound question about the architects of such a system. Who were the planners who conceived of this network, who possessed not only the technical skill to engineer it, but the civic authority to mandate its construction in every home? Their identity remains one of the civilization's most compelling puzzles, but their legacy is clear in every brick-lined drain. A silent testament to a society that valued the unseen foundations of community health as much as the visible grandeur of its streets. And this philosophy of universal access extended to another, even more vital resource, one that flowed not beneath the city, but directly into its heart. The true scale of their ambition becomes clear when you look at the very bricks they used. Across hundreds of miles and over 1,000 years of construction, the people of the Indus Valley adhered to a single, unyielding standard. Their fired bricks were almost always made in a perfect 4:2:1 ratio, twice as long as they were wide and twice as wide as they were thick. This was not a casual preference, it was a rule. Imagine a modern construction site where every single brick, whether made in a northern kiln or a southern workshop, could be swapped with another without a second thought. This standardization is the secret engine behind their rapid, monumental building. It allowed for modular construction on a staggering scale, enabling entire cities to rise with an efficiency that would make a modern developer envious. Walls could be built faster and stronger, with bricklayers knowing exactly how each piece would fit. It speaks to a level of organization that goes beyond mere tradition. It hints at a possible central authority that controlled or at least strictly regulated production, ensuring that every community, from the largest metropolis to the smallest town, was literally building from the same blueprint. This philosophy of uniformity extended from the materials to the buildings themselves. The residential architecture reveals a society deeply concerned with practical, dignified living. The typical home was built around a central courtyard, providing private outdoor space, light, and air circulation. Rooms opened off this courtyard, and crucially, nearly every one of these homes had direct access to that sophisticated sanitation system. The differences between houses were often in size and the number of rooms, not in fundamental quality or access to basic amenities. There are no discovered slums, no districts of hovels huddled outside grand palaces. This pattern suggests a remarkable degree of social cohesion, where even citizens of more modest means enjoyed a standard of urban infrastructure that was extraordinary for the ancient world. Then there are the citadels, the raised, fortified areas found in their major cities. But even here, the Indus Valley defies expectation. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, which were explicitly monuments to god-kings and their cosmic power, the citadels of and Harappa seem intensely practical. They contained large, pillared halls that may have been for public assembly, granaries for storing the community's vital grain supply, and possibly administrative buildings. They were centers of civic function and economic management, not temples to a ruler's ego. The most striking absence in the entire archaeological record is the lack of any clear, grandiose palace or a definitive monumental temple dedicated to a single, all-powerful deity. Power here was not expressed through towering stone testaments to individual glory, but through the quiet, pervasive efficiency of the city itself. The monument was the grid, the temple was the clean water, the palace was the well-built home. This architectural silence is deafening. It forces us to ask, if not a king or a priestly autocrat, then who held the reins of this meticulously planned society? What kind of governance could orchestrate such harmony without feeling the need to shout its name from the rooftops for all eternity? The answer may lie not in a throne room, but in the small, personal artifacts they left behind in those very homes. The most prominent structures in these cities were not homes, but raised, walled platforms known as citadels. Built on massive mud brick foundations, these elevated districts stood apart from the bustling lower towns, physically and symbolically separating certain functions from everyday life. Their very presence suggests a central authority, a group with the power to command the labor needed for such monumental earthworks. Yet, unlike the palaces and temples that crown the high ground in other ancient societies, the citadels of the Indus Valley present us with a profound conundrum. What exactly transpired within these fortified enclosures? The evidence points not to a single, clear answer, but to a multifaceted civic heart. One of the most common features within these citadels is the granary, a vast, carefully ventilated storage complex for the community's harvested grain. This was a brilliant strategic move, protecting the city's most vital resource from flood, theft, or decay. Control of the grain supply implies a sophisticated administrative class, planners who could manage surplus, distribute rations, and ensure stability through lean seasons. Other structures resemble large pillared halls, spaces that could have accommodated public assemblies, councils of elders, or administrative officials conducting the business of the city. The citadel, therefore, begins to look less like a royal fortress and more like a combined city hall, economic planning center, and emergency food bank. A place dedicated to the logistical and governance needs of a complex urban population. But within the citadel of lies a structure that defies purely practical explanation, a place that whispers of something deeper. This is the Great Bath. It is an astonishing feat of engineering, a large, rectangular pool built with finely fitted bricks and sealed with a thick layer of bitumen to make it completely watertight. Sophisticated drains allowed for it to be filled with fresh water and emptied for cleaning. It was surrounded by a colonnade and small rooms, suggesting a formal, processional space. The Great Bath was clearly special, but its purpose remains one of archaeology's great debates. Was it a site for ritual purification, a spiritual center where ceremonial bathing held religious significance, much like in later traditions in the region? Or was it a grand public amenity, a civic pool for communal gathering and social ceremony? Its prominent location on the Citadel suggests it was central to the city's identity, a place where the physical act of cleanliness may have been intertwined with social order, and perhaps even spiritual well-being. This separation between the elevated citadel and the residential lower town does imply a form of social hierarchy, a distinction between those who managed and those who were managed. Yet the hierarchy we see is strikingly muted. There are no vast treasure-filled tombs, no colossal statues of rulers, no inscriptions glorifying military conquests. The authority here seems to have been vested in a system, in roles and responsibilities, rather than in the overwhelming personality of a single god-king. The citadel was the brain of the operation, but it was a brain that served the body of the city, ensuring its health, its nourishment, and its cohesion. This very absence of self-aggrandizing monuments is what makes the Indus Valley so uniquely mysterious. Their greatest symbols of power were not idols or obelisks, but a water tank, a grain store, and a network of clean streets. The silence from these citadels is not a silence of emptiness, but a silence of profound focus, a civilization that spoke through action and infrastructure rather than proclamation. And this leads us to the most intimate and frustrating silence of all, the one contained in the small, carved artifacts found in homes and workshops across the civilization, a script we can see but cannot hear. This meticulous planning presents a paradox. How do you coordinate a civilization spanning 1,000,000 square kilometers, with standardized bricks and city grids, without leaving behind a single deciphered instruction manual? The Indus Valley people did have a writing system, one of the earliest in the world. Thousands of small, square seals made of steatite, and fragments of pottery bear elegant, stylized symbols of animals and a script that remains utterly silent to us. The inscriptions are short, averaging just 4 or 5 signs, and they appear most often on items used in trade, like seals for stamping bales of goods. This suggests their primary function was economic, labeling ownership, contents, or origins. But the frustrating brevity and the lack of a bilingual text, like a stone, have kept their meaning locked away for over a century of study. If they did write administrative decrees or architectural plans, those records were likely made on perishable materials like palm leaves or cloth, lost forever to the humid climate. So we are left with a profound question: how did they manage it? The answer may lie not in written orders, but in a different kind of language, one spoken through action and embodied in objects. The real blueprint for their cities might have been carried in the minds of a highly trained, specialized class. Think of guilds of master surveyors and engineers, who passed down precise knowledge orally and through practical apprenticeship. A senior planner could teach an apprentice the exact ratios for brickmaking, the proper angles for drainage channels, and the sacred geometry of the street grid, all through demonstration and memorized formula. This knowledge would become a protected professional tradition, a living library walking from city to city, ensuring consistency across the vast landscape. Their universal language was not just spoken, it was measured. The civilization employed an exceptionally precise and uniform system of weights. Exquisitely crafted cubes of chert, a hard stone, have been found from site to site, following a strict decimal progression. The basic unit weighed about 13.6 grams, and multiples of this unit were used consistently for over 700 years. Imagine a merchant from a distant Indus outpost arriving at the docks of. He would not need to negotiate exchange rates or argue over measures. His set of stone weights, identical to those used in the city, allowed for seamless, fair trade. This standardization extended to linear measures as well, implied by the consistent brick sizes and the modular dimensions of buildings. A ruler found that was marked with incredibly precise divisions. This network of agreed-upon standards created a framework of trust and predictability that enabled the economy to flourish and, crucially, allowed for the replication of complex urban plans. The authority of this society seems to have been embedded in these systems, in shared technical knowledge and cultural norms, rather than in the personality of a ruler. The absence of grandiose inscriptions praising kings or celebrating military victories is deafening. Their monuments were not stone steles boasting of conquest, but a perfectly weighted cube, a well-laid brick, and a cleanly flowing drain. The societal glue was a collective commitment to an orderly, functional, and hygienic way of life, a cohesion we can see not in palaces, but in the artifacts of daily life, in the toys, the jewelry, and the kitchenware found in homes across the social spectrum. This very focus on the practical and the communal makes their ultimate fate, the gradual fading of their cities, all the more poignant and mysterious. What could disrupt a society so deeply rooted in stability and so brilliantly adapted to its environment? The clues point not to a single cataclysm, but to a slow unraveling of the very systems they had perfected. The silence of their script forces us to listen to the language of their tools. To build a world of right angles and perfect ratios, the Indus Valley engineers relied on a sophisticated, yet elegantly simple, toolkit. Archaeologists have uncovered the physical evidence of their craft: copper saws with fine teeth for cutting wood and stone, sturdy chisels for carving and shaping, and adzes for smoothing timber. They used bow drills, a clever device that allowed for precise, rotational force to bore holes in beads, seals, and wood, a technology essential for both artistry and construction. But perhaps their most crucial tools were not made of metal, but of perception. To lay out those vast, perfectly oriented grids, they almost certainly employed basic optical aids. A simple sighting instrument, like a plumb bob suspended from a frame, could establish true verticals. A length of cord, stretched taut and kept level with a water-filled trench, could define a perfectly straight line across great distances. The consistent orientation of their cities to the cardinal directions suggests they understood celestial navigation, using the sun or stars to fix their primary axes. This blend of simple physics and astronomical observation was their true drafting table. Their mastery of measurement, however, is where their systematic genius becomes tangible. We have already glimpsed their standardized weights, those polished stone cubes, but the system's elegance is in its flawless consistency. The basic unit was not arbitrary. It seems to have been derived from the weight of a specific number of barleycorns, a natural reference point anyone could understand. From this unit, they built a decimal system, with weights doubling in a precise sequence, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on, all the way up to large units over 10 kilograms. A merchant inn and a warehouse keeper in Harappa were using the same invisible rulebook, enabling fair trade across continents. This metrological harmony extended to length. A shell ruler found at is marked with the smallest known division from the Bronze Age, proving an obsession with precision. Such tools allowed a master builder to specify dimensions not with vague instructions, but with exact, replicable numbers, ensuring that a brick mold in one city produced the same brick as a mold 500 miles away. Beyond the utilitarian, their artifacts reveal a society that valued beauty in the everyday. Excavations yield exquisite inlay work, where tiny pieces of shell, fired ceramic, or semi-precious stone were set into furniture or decorative objects, creating intricate geometric and floral patterns. This speaks to a high level of artisan skill and an aesthetic appreciation woven into domestic life. Yet, this sophistication makes one of their apparent absences all the more thought-provoking. For much of their history, there is no definitive evidence for the wheeled cart. The logistical feat of building, which required moving millions of standardized bricks, not to mention timber and stone, was likely accomplished using sledges, rollers, barges on the river, and vast amounts of coordinated human labor. This absence is not a sign of primitiveness, but a testament to their extraordinary organizational power. They achieved monumental results not by waiting for a specific technological breakthrough, but by perfecting the art of human coordination and leveraging the tools they had with impeccable efficiency. Viewing their cities through this lens transforms them from static ruins into living ecosystems. The copper saw, the stone weight, the shell inlay, and the absent cart are all parts of an integrated whole. The tools enabled the precision, the weights governed the economy that fueled the construction, and the artistry reflected the communal pride in the result. Their city was not just a place to live, it was a magnificent machine, maintained by shared knowledge and a common vision for order. This makes the machine's eventual, gradual slowing down one of history's most compelling puzzles. A system so robust, so meticulously planned, does not simply stop. Which raises a haunting question. What subtle shifts in their environment could have begun to undo the perfect balance they had spent a millennium building? The true monument of the Indus Valley was not stone, but water. Their relationship with the life-giving, yet destructive, Indus River defined their existence and showcased their most profound engineering prowess. While the intricate drains beneath their streets managed waste, an even more critical system delivered fresh, clean water directly to their citizens. Scattered throughout the ruins of Harappa are hundreds of brick-lined wells, a testament to a decentralized, neighborhood-based approach to hydration. These were not haphazard holes in the ground, but carefully engineered structures, often featuring corbelled arches at their tops to prevent collapse and steps leading down to the water table, ensuring access even during dry seasons. In a city of tens of thousands, these wells provided a reliable, local source of drinking water, strategically placed so no resident had to travel far. But their vision extended beyond simple wells. At sites like, located in a more arid region, archaeologists have uncovered a breathtakingly sophisticated water conservation system. The entire city was designed around a series of massive, interconnected reservoirs, carved into the bedrock and lined with stone. These were not mere ponds, they were engineered catchment basins, designed to capture every drop of monsoon rainwater and channel it through a network of stone-cut conduits for storage. This allowed a city in a near desert to thrive, turning seasonal deluges into a year-round resource. Their mastery likely extended to the river itself. The Indus is a powerful, capricious force, prone to devastating floods that could erase years of work in days. While direct archaeological evidence is elusive due to the river's shifting course over, It is almost certain that the builders constructed extensive embankments and levees. Earthen walls designed to hold back the floodwaters and protect their precious grid of streets and homes. This was a continuous, silent battle, a community-wide effort to tame nature's unpredictability through collective labor and foresight. This holistic hydraulic engineering was the foundation of everything. Reliable water meant reliable agriculture. With controlled irrigation from canals likely fed by the river or reservoirs, farmers could produce the massive grain surpluses that filled those citadel granaries. This surplus is what freed a significant portion of the population from farming, allowing for the specialization of labor that defines urban civilization: the potters, the bead makers, the surveyors, the administrators. Their entire society, from its dense urban cores to its thriving trade networks, was built upon a foundation of managed water. This deep, symbiotic relationship with their environment is what makes their eventual decline so hauntingly instructive. Their resilience was born from understanding and controlling water. Their vulnerability, it seems, may have stemmed from that same source. When the very systems they perfected began to fail under pressures they could no longer foresee or contain. The residential districts reveal the true heart of this civilization. Walking through the lower town, you are surrounded by a rhythm of baked brick walls, a pattern of doorways and windows that feels both orderly and familiar. The houses, while varying in size from compact single-story dwellings to larger two-story complexes, all share a fundamental blueprint. Nearly every home was built around a central courtyard, a private outdoor space for light, air, and family life. From this courtyard, rooms branched off, and crucially, nearly every unit contained its own dedicated bathroom, complete with a brick floor sloped toward a drain that connected to the city's main sewer lines. This was not a luxury, it was a standard. There are no discovered slums, no districts of shoddy hovels clinging to the outside of a mighty wall. Conversely, there is also no excavated palace of staggering scale, no single residential compound that dwarfs all others in a display of overwhelming wealth and power. The architecture speaks to a society that prioritized a baseline standard of dignified living for a remarkably broad segment of its urban population. This focus on domestic comfort, privacy, and public health for the many, rather than outrageous opulence for the few, is a revolutionary concept in the ancient world. What does this uniformity imply about their social structure? Some scholars see this as evidence of a remarkably egalitarian society, one where differences in status were muted and collective well-being was a primary civic goal. The shared access to advanced sanitation and water suggests a powerful communal ethic, where the health of one neighbor directly impacted the health of all. Yet, other researchers urge caution. Hierarchy can be subtle. The variation in house size, with some homes boasting many rooms and upper stories, indicates differences in wealth and social standing. The very existence of the raised citadel, separate from the lower town, implies a distinction between those who governed and those who were governed. The truth likely lies in a nuanced middle ground. This was probably not a classless utopia, but it does appear to have been a society where extreme disparity was actively minimized. Status may have been expressed through the size of one's home or the fineness of one's pottery, not through the denial of basic amenities to others. The revolutionary idea was that a brick floor, a private courtyard, and a connection to the city's clean water were not privileges, but expected features of urban life. This makes the eventual silence of these neighborhoods profoundly moving. These were not temporary shelters, but homes built with care, designed for generations of family life, for the sounds of daily routine echoing in sunlit courtyards. To understand why these comfortable, well-planned homes were ultimately left behind, we must look beyond their walls to the environmental pressures that began to strain the very foundations of this carefully balanced world. The wide, straight streets of were not just for movement, they were channels of commerce. At the heart of these meticulously planned cities, archaeologists have identified large, open plazas, often situated near the citadel or major gateways. These were not empty spaces, but the likely bustling market squares, the economic engines of the urban machine. Here, the city's famous standardization found its most practical expression. The same weights and measures used from one end of the civilization to the other created a currency of trust. A merchant from the distant highlands could set up his stall, place his polished stone weight on a scale, and conduct business with a local buyer without dispute, because both were playing by the same invisible rules. This wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. It allowed for a complex economy to function smoothly across thousands of miles, binding the civilization together through a shared language of value. The goods traded in these squares tell a story of astonishing reach. In the ruins of Harappa, you might find beads of brilliant blue lapis lazuli, a stone that comes only from mines deep in what is now Afghanistan. Shimmering red carnelian beads, meticulously drilled and polished, originated from sources in Gujarat, far to the south. They traded in copper from Rajasthan, and crucially in tin, the essential alloy that when mixed with copper created bronze. Tin sources were rare and distant, meaning its acquisition required organized, long-distance trade networks that must have been carefully maintained. This flow of luxury and necessity was managed through another ingenious invention, the seal. Thousands of small, square steatite seals, carved with animals like the iconic unicorn bull and inscribed with those mysterious symbols, have been found. These were likely used to stamp bales of cloth, bags of grain, or ceramic vessels, acting as a trademark, a certificate of origin, or a form of administrative control. A sealed item found in Mesopotamia proves these networks stretched across the sea. This regulated, thriving economy was not a separate part of city life. It was woven directly into the urban fabric. The wide streets allowed carts and porters to move goods efficiently from the river docks to the market squares. The uniform brick sizes meant warehouses could be built to standard specifications for storage. The entire city plan facilitated the smooth flow of things, turning urban space into a tool for prosperity. This economic vitality did more than just enrich merchants, it funded the civilization itself. The surplus wealth generated by trade would have been the resource that paid for, or more likely supported through a tax or tithe system, the massive public works that defined them. It funded the armies of laborers who built the citadel platforms and the Great Bath. It supported the engineers who designed the drainage networks, and it sustained the administrators who coordinated it all. Their cities were not just places to live, they were carefully calibrated machines for generating and distributing wealth, ensuring that the grain from the countryside, the crafted goods from the workshops, and the treasures from across the known world could all circulate to sustain a vast, sophisticated population. This intricate system of give and take, stretching from Afghan mines to Mesopotamian ports, reveals a civilization fully engaged with its world. A network so robust it makes its eventual quiet dissolution all the more difficult to comprehend. This remarkable sense of security is written in the very ground plan of their cities. In a world where towering walls were the universal symbol of power and protection, the Indus Valley made a different and telling choice. While contemporary cities in Mesopotamia and Egypt invested immense resources in constructing massive, intimidating fortifications, often with multiple gates and watchtowers. Many major Indus settlements show a surprising lack of extensive defensive walls. For instance, had a fortified citadel mound, but the sprawling lower city, where most people lived and worked, seems to have been largely open. This absence is a profound statement. It suggests that the people who lived here did not feel a constant, pressing threat from aggressive neighbors or rival armies. Building a wall around a city of that scale was an enormous undertaking, requiring thousands of laborers and consuming vast resources. The decision not to build one implies those resources and that labor were directed elsewhere, into the wells, the drains, and the comfortable homes that define their quality of life. So what provided their sense of safety? One compelling possibility is geographic. The civilization was nestled within a river-valley system, with mountains to the west and north and arid expanses to the east. These natural barriers may have served as a first line of defense, making large-scale invasions logistically difficult. Their true fortress, however, might have been their own reputation and reach. A civilization this vast, with such standardized trade networks and a likely powerful administrative core, could project stability and strength. Potential adversaries would have faced not just a single city, but a coordinated cultural and economic sphere. Conflict, when it occurred, may have been small-scale or ritualized, not the kind of total warfare that necessitated encircling every population center in stone. The citadels themselves offer another clue. These raised, walled districts, present in major cities, could have served as final redoubts, places where the community and its vital grain supplies could retreat in the face of a rare crisis. They were strongpoints, not perimeter defenses, designed for a society that expected peace to be the norm and conflict to be the brief exception. This strategic choice in urban planning paints a picture of a civilization that was internally stable and confident in its place in the world. It speaks to a degree of social cohesion, where internal rebellion was not a constant fear, and to external relations that were managed more through trade and diplomacy than through the threat of the sword. Their monuments were to civic life, not to martial prowess. This profound sense of safety makes the civilization's eventual quiet decline all the more perplexing. If they were not overrun by a sudden, cataclysmic invasion, what slow, creeping force could have undermined a society so secure in its own foundations? The walls they did not build become a silent question mark, pointing us toward a more subtle and perhaps more unsettling explanation for their disappearance. The contrast is starkest when we look east and west. While the Indus Valley was laying out its perfect grid, two other cradles of civilization were rising with a completely different vision. To the west, in the fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates, stood the great city of Ur. Its streets were a dense, winding maze, an organic tangle that grew from the center outward, following the whims of geography and generations of haphazard construction. The city was dominated by a towering ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid dedicated to the moon god, and the lavish tombs of kings like the famous royal cemetery. This was a skyline built for the gods and the rulers who served as their intermediaries, a clear hierarchy carved in stone and rising toward the heavens. The streets below were almost an afterthought, a service network for the glory above. Now look south to the Nile. Egypt's defining monuments are the pyramids of Giza, tombs on a cosmic scale built for a single individual, the pharaoh, believed to be a living god. The entire society was oriented around ensuring his divine journey and eternal rule. Labor, art, and architecture were marshaled to proclaim one overwhelming truth: the absolute, unassailable power of the king. The homes of the workers who built these wonders were temporary, practical settlements, utterly secondary to the eternal stone testament of their ruler. Against this backdrop, the Indus Valley choice feels revolutionary. They invested not in a single tomb or temple, but in the lived experience of an entire population. Their citadels held granaries and assembly halls, not golden sarcophagi. Their widest streets served merchants and families, not just priestly processions. This was a civilization that measured its grandeur horizontally, across the community, rather than vertically toward a solitary apex of power. Even in practical matters like water, the difference is telling. Centuries later, the Minoans of Crete would build the magnificent palace of Knossos with its advanced plumbing, but this system served the royal complex, a marvel for the elite. In the Indus cities, the advanced drainage and the hundreds of wells served nearly every home in the city. The luxury of clean, managed water was not a royal privilege, it was a civic right. These comparisons force a fundamental question. We are accustomed to the ancient world speaking to us through the voices of kings and gods, their power etched in colossal monuments. The Indus Valley speaks in a different dialect, one of shared infrastructure and social planning. It presents a powerful alternative model for what a complex society can be, one where collective welfare and urban efficiency could be the highest ideals, where a society's greatest achievement might be a well-functioning, healthy city for all its people. This quiet, practical genius challenges our very definition of civilization's success. It asks us to consider if the true mark of a great society is what it builds for its rulers in death, or what it builds for its citizens in life. Beyond the orderly brick streets, a different kind of geometry stretched to the horizon. The great cities of the Indus Valley were not isolated islands of sophistication. They were the beating hearts of a vast and meticulously managed agricultural landscape. For every artisan shaping beads in, there were countless farmers tending fields under the open sky, their labor fueling the entire urban experiment. This was a civilization built on a foundation of grain, and its true genius extended far beyond the city walls into the fertile plains watered by the great river and its tributaries. Scattered across the region, archaeologists have identified the remains of smaller settlements, villages, and towns that clearly functioned as agricultural hubs. These were not random clusters of huts, but planned communities with their own wells, storage pits, and evidence of craft production, suggesting a decentralized yet integrated network for managing the land. The fields themselves would have been a site of remarkable productivity. The Indus farmers cultivated a diverse and nutritious diet, growing staples like wheat and barley, along with pulses such as peas, lentils, and chickpeas. They grew dates and melons, and they mastered a crop that would change the world: cotton. They were the first civilization we know of to systematically cultivate cotton for the production of cloth, a textile innovation of staggering importance. This agricultural abundance was made possible by their mastery of water on a grand scale. While the cities had their drains and wells, the countryside relied on a larger hydraulic system. Evidence, though often obscured by silt and shifting river courses, points to the construction of canals and channels for irrigation. They likely built simple but effective check dams and diversion barrages to channel river water into their fields, ensuring crops could thrive even in drier seasons. This transformed the rhythm of farming from a gamble on the rains into a more predictable science, enabling the reliable surpluses that urban life demands. And moving through these fields were the indispensable partners in this endeavor: domesticated animals. Herds of the distinctive humped zebu cattle provided not only meat and milk, but also draft power for plows and carts. Water buffalo, sheep, and goats were also raised, creating a mixed farming economy that was both resilient and rich. The relationship between the rural producer and the urban consumer was the civilization's vital artery. Harvested grain would be collected, measured with those standardized stone weights, and transported, likely by river barge and bullock cart, to the citadel granaries in the cities. These granaries, like the famous one were engineering marvels in their own right, with raised floors and ventilation ducts designed to protect the precious surplus from damp and pests. This stored grain was the civilization's bank, its buffer against famine, and the currency that paid for public works and supported the non-farming population. The entire system represented a profound symbiotic contract. The cities provided security, a market for goods, and administrative coordination. The countryside provided the literal sustenance that made everything else possible. This delicate, brilliant balance between the urban and the rural was the engine of their longevity, a testament to planning that encompassed an entire ecosystem. It is this very balance, so carefully maintained for centuries, that makes the next chapter of their story not a sudden collapse, but a slow, creeping unraveling. As the environmental foundations beneath their fields and cities began, imperceptibly at first, to shift, their cities were masterpieces of adaptation, built not against nature, but in careful conversation with it. To truly grasp their planning genius, we must step back and see the world as they saw it, a world painted in different colors by a more forgiving climate. The land we know today as the arid plains of Pakistan and northwest India was, 4,000 years ago, a significantly greener and wetter place. Scientific evidence, drawn from ancient pollen grains preserved in lake sediments and geological core samples, tells a story of a lush environment. This was not a desert fringe, but a landscape dotted with forests of acacia and tamarisk, with grasslands that supported abundant wildlife, and with a river system that was both generous and predictable. The mighty Indus and its sister rivers, like the flowed with greater volume, fed by stronger monsoon rains, and perhaps by glacial melt from the Himalayas that was more consistent than it is today. This was the environmental envelope, the set of conditions within which the great planners worked, and every single choice they made was a response to its possibilities and its perils. The very orientation of their famous grid streets may have been calculated to harness the wind. By aligning major avenues with the prevailing breezes, they created a natural ventilation system, funneling cooler air through the city to provide relief from the heat. A form of passive climate control built into the urban fabric. Their most dramatic adaptations, however, were defenses against the river's power. Those imposing, man-made citadel mounds, built from millions of baskets of earth and brick, were not just symbolic centers, they were elevated islands of safety. In a landscape prone to seasonal flooding, raising their administrative and storage districts high above the plain was an act of profound foresight, a way to protect their grain, their records, and their leadership from the annual deluge. Even the standardized, kiln-fired bricks themselves were a technological answer to the environment, far more resistant to water damage and erosion than the sun-dried mud bricks used in drier regions. Their entire civilization was a calibrated system, a perfect balance between human ambition and ecological reality. They understood their world with a deep, intuitive literacy, reading the rhythms of the river, the patterns of the wind, and the fertility of the soil. Their planning was not an attempt to conquer nature, but to dance with it, to build a society that could thrive within the specific gifts and challenges of their green, river-fed home. This makes the next chapter of their story not merely a historical event, but an ecological parable. For when the delicate balance of that environment began to change, the very foundations of their meticulously planned world would start to quietly, irrevocably, shift beneath them. The air over at its height would have hummed with a purposeful energy. Picture a city of perhaps 40,000 souls, a number staggering for its time, all moving through a space designed for clarity and efficiency. On those 30-foot wide main streets, the scene was one of orchestrated flow. Bullock carts, their wooden wheels creaking, moved goods from the river docks toward the market squares, their drivers navigating with ease thanks to the predictable grid. Pedestrians walked along raised brick footpaths, separated from the cart traffic, an early form of sidewalk that speaks to a concern for public safety and order. The soundscape was a symphony of industry, the tapping of stone masons shaping chert weights, the rhythmic scrape of potters at their wheels, and the chatter of merchants in a dozen dialects, all unified by the shared measures of their trade. In countless workshops, artisans practiced crafts of exquisite precision, drilling tiny holes in carnelian beads with bow drills, or carving the intricate animal figures onto seals that would travel across the known world. The city was not a silent monument, but a vibrant, breathing organism, its heartbeat measured in the steady draw of water from hundreds of public and private wells, the true lifelines of the community. At the geographic and symbolic heart of it all stood the great bath on its high citadel. Here, the civic and possibly spiritual life of the city converged. The large, watertight pool, filled with clean, fresh water, was a marvel that would have shimmered under the sun. It was a space for ceremony, for purification, or perhaps simply for communal gathering, its colonnaded walkways offering a place for conversation and connection away from the bustling markets below. This was urbanism perfected, a place where the needs of the body for clean water, efficient movement, and economic opportunity were met in harmony with a deeper need for social cohesion and shared identity. To walk those streets at their peak was to witness humanity's potential for peaceful, coordinated complexity, a testament not to a single ruler's ego, but to a society's collective will to build a better, more orderly world. The success of this endeavor, the sight of tens of thousands thriving in such carefully planned harmony, is what makes the silence that eventually fell here feel not like an ending, but like a profound and unanswered question. The gleaming order of their cities leaves us with shadows just as deep. For all the astonishing detail we have uncovered about the Indus Valley, from their brick ratios to their decimal weights, vast and fundamental gaps remain in our understanding. These are not small mysteries, but profound silences at the very heart of their story. The most conspicuous absence is the lack of unmistakable, grandiose monuments to individual power. Where are the royal tombs brimming with gold and sacrificed servants, so common in Egypt and Mesopotamia? Where are the towering temples dedicated to a single, all-powerful deity, their walls covered in inscriptions praising a king's divine right? We have the Great Bath, a place of profound communal importance, but no structure that clearly shouts, "This is where a god-king lived and ruled." This silence forces us to ask, what was the precise nature of their political system? Was it a council of elders, a merchant oligarchy, or a theocracy where priests held sway? The evidence simply does not give us a definitive answer. We see the results of a powerful, centralized authority in the uniform city plans, but we cannot name a single ruler, nor can we point to a palace that was their home. This leads directly to another great puzzle. How was the labor for their massive projects mobilized? Building the platform for the citadel of a required moving millions of cubic feet of earth. Laying out a perfect grid across miles, constructing citywide sewer lines, and firing countless standardized bricks, all required a staggering coordination of human effort. Was this done through a system of taxation, where citizens contributed a season of labor as a civic duty? Was it a form of conscripted service, or was it voluntary, driven by a shared cultural vision? The tools of archaeology, which can reveal the what of construction with brilliant clarity, often struggle to reveal the how of social organization that made it possible. Part of the challenge is environmental. The very river that gave them life also obscures their past. The Indus plain is waterlogged, with a high water table that has risen over. This means that the oldest, deepest layers of their cities, the very foundations where the earliest decisions were made, are often permanently submerged or too damaged by moisture to yield clear evidence. Countless smaller settlements or early administrative centers may lie buried deep under silt or have been completely washed away by the river's changing course over 4,000 years. Furthermore, the ancient Indus script, found on seals and pottery, remains tantalizingly undeciphered. These short inscriptions likely recorded names, origins, or quantities, but without a bilingual text like the stone, they are mute. If they kept administrative records on palm leaves or woven cloth, those organic materials have long since dissolved in the humid climate. So we are left inferring governance from architecture, guessing at beliefs from figurines, and reconstructing society from the silent testimony of bricks and drains. Yet these gaps are not failures of archaeology, they are invitations. They remind us that history is not a solved puzzle, but an ongoing conversation with the past. Every new technological advance, from ground-penetrating radar to satellite imagery, offers a chance to find a missing piece. A future discovery, perhaps a sealed archive in a city quarter, could suddenly give voice to those silent seals and transform our entire understanding. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization is not a closed book, but a manuscript with many pages still waiting to be carefully lifted from the earth. Each new fragment we find has the power to change the entire picture, ensuring that this most orderly and mysterious of ancient worlds continues to challenge and captivate us. The silence of their palaces forces us to listen to their tools. Who held the authority to command such perfect order across a continent? Without a single statue of a king or a grand tomb filled with regalia, historians are left piecing together a picture of power from fragments, leading to several compelling and competing theories. One long-standing idea points toward a theocracy, a rule by priest-kings. This theory draws from a handful of intriguing artifacts, like the famous seal depicting a figure seated in a yogic posture, surrounded by animals, sometimes called a proto-Shiva. Could this represent a powerful priest or a deity whose earthly representatives held sway? The prominence of the Great Bath, a structure that feels ceremonial, and the apparent lack of militaristic iconography lend some weight to this view. Perhaps authority flowed from a class that mediated between the people and the divine, using ritual and spiritual legitimacy to coordinate the massive civic projects. Yet the evidence is circumstantial, and the sheer volume of trade goods suggests another powerful group entirely. A second, equally persuasive theory proposes a mercantile oligarchy. Imagine a council of the wealthiest merchants and guild masters, whose power was built not on divine right, but on economic control. They would have overseen the vast trade networks in lapis lazuli, carnelian, copper, and cotton. Their need for standardization in weights and measures, for efficient ports and wide streets for carts, directly explains the urban planning we see. In this view, the city was a machine for commerce, and its rulers were its chief engineers, profiting from and protecting the flow of goods. A third, more complex idea suggests a decentralized or corporate state. Instead of a single capital ruling all, power may have been shared among elite groups in the major cities like Harappa, and forming a confederation bound by common culture and mutual economic interest. Authority might have been distributed among guilds of engineers, surveyors, and artisans, whose specialized knowledge gave them social standing. The consistent planning could have been maintained through a shared technical tradition, a professional blueprint passed down through generations, rather than through edicts from a throne. What unites these theories is a radical departure from the ancient norm. The Indus Valley seems to challenge the very assumption that complex civilization requires a charismatic, all-powerful individual at its apex. Theirs may have been a society where authority was embedded in the systems themselves, in the unbreakable rules of brick ratios and weight standards, in the shared commitment to public health and hydraulic management. Power was not a person to be glorified, but a process to be maintained, a collective project so ingrained that it needed no king to give it a name. This makes their eventual dispersal not the fall of a dynasty, but the slow fading of a consensus, a quiet unraveling that began not with a siege, but with a subtle shift in the world around them. The genius of their urban plan extended beyond the flow of water and people to the very organization of work itself. Within the orderly grid of the city, archaeologists have uncovered distinct neighborhoods that functioned as dedicated industrial quarters. This was not a haphazard scattering of workshops, but a deliberate zoning of economic activity, of urban planning that separated the noise, smoke, and waste of large-scale production from the quiet courtyards of residential life. In one district, you might find the remnants of a beadmaker's workshop, the floor littered with tiny, discarded stone chips and unfinished carnelian blanks. Nearby, a series of small, circular brick furnaces speaks to metalworking, where artisans smelted copper and tin to create bronze tools and ornaments. The air in these zones would have carried the scent of burning charcoal, the tang of metal, and the dust of finely ground stone. This separation reveals a sophisticated understanding of urban livability and environmental management that feels remarkably modern. By concentrating industrial activity, they could better control pollution, manage waste disposal, and minimize the disruption to daily domestic life. It also points to a highly organized economy, where artisans of the same craft likely worked in close collaboration, sharing techniques, tools, and resources, fostering innovation and ensuring quality control. The scale of production in these zones is evident from the archaeological debris itself: vast middens of pottery shards, layers of ash from kilns, and piles of manufacturing waste. This was not cottage industry, but planned, municipal-scale production. A single pottery workshop might have contained multiple kilns, suggesting a team of potters producing standardized vessels for the entire city's needs. This level of organization required forethought and regulation, woven into the original city blueprint. The planners did not just allocate space for homes and streets, they designated zones for the economic engines that would sustain the community, ensuring the city functioned as a cohesive, efficient, and more pleasant place to live for everyone. The echo of a civilization is heard long after its cities fall silent. While the great metropolises of the Indus Valley were gradually abandoned, their meticulous philosophy of order did not simply vanish into the dust. Instead, their legacy may have seeped into the cultural bedrock of the Indian subcontinent, resurfacing centuries later in new forms and traditions. One of the most intriguing threads connects their profound relationship with water to later spiritual practices. The Great Bath, with its emphasis on contained, purified water in a formal architectural setting, finds a distant but recognizable cousin in the sacred, or of later Hindu temple complexes. These are not mere ponds, but precisely constructed, often geometrically perfect, stepped tanks used for ritual bathing before worship. The concept of a designated, architecturally significant space for purification, separating the clean from the unclean, mirrors a core principle embedded in those ancient Indus drains and wells. It suggests a cultural memory, a persistent idea that spiritual and physical cleanliness are intertwined, and that the management of water is central to both communal health and sacred order. This idea of purity, so practically enforced through sanitation, may have evolved over into a key tenet of later social and religious life. Another fascinating resonance appears in the realm of urban design itself. Centuries after the Indus cities were forgotten, a body of knowledge called Shastra emerged in ancient India. These are Sanskrit texts that provide guidelines for architecture and city planning, aiming to harmonize human dwellings with cosmic principles. While as we know it was much later, its most striking recommendation is the use of a grid pattern, dividing land into precise, rectangular plots for optimal energy flow and social harmony. The idealized city described in these texts, with its gates at the cardinal directions and its orderly internal divisions, feels hauntingly familiar. It is not a copy of, but it speaks to a similar aspiration, a deep-seated cultural preference for an ordered, balanced, and predictable human environment. Could this preference be a very old echo, a fragment of planning wisdom that survived in collective memory long after the names of the original engineers were lost? The evidence does not point to a direct, unbroken line of transmission. There is a vast gulf of centuries, migrations, and new cultural formations between the two. Yet the similarities are too compelling to dismiss as mere coincidence. It is more likely that the Indus Valley experience entered the subcontinent's deep cultural vocabulary. Their successful experiment in large-scale, peaceful, hygienic urban living demonstrated the profound benefits of a certain kind of order. That demonstration, that proof of concept, may have lingered as a kind of cultural ideal, a whispered legend of how a society could function at its best. When later cultures began to build great cities and codify their own architectural principles, they were perhaps drawing from a well of ancient, half-remembered success. The legacy of the Indus Valley, therefore, might not be in specific blueprints passed down, but in the enduring power of an idea, the idea that human settlements can be deliberate acts of harmony. That planning is an expression of collective care, and that the true measure of a civilization is found in the quality of life it creates for its people. This quiet, persistent idea is their most lasting monument, one that continues to shape how we think about the spaces we build and the communities we aspire to be. For nearly 4,000 years, the great cities slept under the earth, their stories muted by dust and time. Their rediscovery is a tale not of deliberate search, but of accidental encounter, a drama that began with the rumble of a modern train. In the mid-19th century, British engineers were building the Lahore to Multan Railway, a project of colonial ambition stretching across the plains of the Punjab. They needed vast quantities of hard, durable material for the trackbed, the ballast that would support the iron rails. Their eyes fell upon a massive, crumbling mound near a small village called Harappa. To them, it was just a convenient hill of excellent, pre-fired bricks. For decades, trainloads of these ancient, carefully crafted blocks were crushed and packed beneath the tracks, unknowingly destroying the physical fabric of a lost world to pave the way for a new one. The civilization was quite literally being ground into gravel. It was a chance visit by a curious railway engineer, Alexander, that first raised an alarm. He noticed that some of the bricks from the mound were exceptionally large and uniform, and he collected a few strange, carved seals depicting animals and unknown symbols. Though he identified the site as ancient, the true scale of what was being lost remained unseen. The systematic destruction continued until the early 20th century, when a new generation of archaeologists looked closer. A brilliant Indian archaeologist, began excavations at another massive mound further south, known locally as the Mound of the Dead. He uncovered not just isolated artifacts, but the unmistakable outline of a planned city, with wide streets and sophisticated architecture. His work caught the attention of John Marshall, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. Marshall, synthesizing the finds from both Harappa and made a staggering declaration in 1924. He announced the discovery of a previously unknown civilization, contemporary with Egypt and Mesopotamia, but utterly distinct in character. The world was stunned. Here was a sophisticated urban culture that had flourished on the Indian subcontinent before any previously recorded history in the region. The irony was profound. A colonial infrastructure project designed to service an empire had inadvertently led to the unearthing of a magnificent indigenous civilization, one whose achievements challenged Western notions of historical progress and cultural hierarchy. The very bricks used to bind the land for imperial control became the key to unlocking a far older, and in many ways more advanced, chapter of human history. This modern revelation was a story of recovery emerging from loss, a reminder that the past often speaks most clearly when we are busy building something else. The Great Bath stands as the most enigmatic structure in the entire Indus Valley. Its perfect watertight tank, sealed with natural tar, is an undeniable feat of engineering. But its true purpose remains a mystery that reaches beyond bricks and mortar into the realm of belief and social ritual. Was this a sacred space, a purely civic amenity, or something that blurred the lines between the two? The architecture itself provides the first clues. The bath is not tucked away in a private corner, but prominently placed on the high citadel, signaling its immense importance to the community. It is surrounded by a colonnade, a covered walkway that creates a processional feel, and a series of small rooms that could have served as changing areas, spaces for preparation, or even for secluded contemplation. This careful framing suggests that what happened here was not a casual dip, but a formal, structured activity. The water itself, so meticulously contained and managed, would have been a powerful symbol in a civilization built on hydraulic control. In a land where the river could bring both life and destruction, a perfectly still, clean, and human-made pool of water represented ultimate order over nature's chaos. One compelling interpretation is that the Great Bath served as a site for ritual purification. The act of bathing before entering a sacred space is a practice found in many religions across the world, from in Judaism to the ceremonial pools in Hindu temples. Priests or initiates might have used this space to cleanse themselves physically and symbolically before performing ceremonies, perhaps in the large hall just to the west of the bath. The small rooms could have been used for disrobing and anointing, turning the act into a solemn ritual. Yet, there is also a strong case for a more communal social function. Could it have been an elite public pool, a place for the city's leading citizens to gather, socialize, and reinforce community bonds? The colonnade would have provided shade for spectators or those in conversation, making it a center for civic interaction. It might have been used for seasonal festivals, initiation rites for young adults, or even as a therapeutic space. The most likely answer, given the holistic nature of Indus planning, is that it was both. For them, the spiritual and the social, the practical and the symbolic, were likely intertwined. Cleanliness was not just about public health, it was a form of social and possibly spiritual order. The Great Bath, then, becomes the civilization's spiritual counterpart to its physical sewer system. One managed waste, the other managed purity. Both were about maintaining balance. This space offers our clearest glimpse into their intangible world, a world where the meticulous planning of streets and drains was matched by an equally profound need for ritual, meaning, and shared experience. It reminds us that even the most practical of societies seeks connection to something greater than the material, and in the silent, reflective waters of the Great Bath, we might just hear the faintest echo of their collective spirit. The first cracks in the perfect grid appeared not with a bang, but with a slow, quiet neglect. Around 1900 years before the Common Era, the meticulous order that had defined the Indus cities for centuries began to subtly unravel. Archaeologists digging through the upper layers of and Harappa find a story told in crumbling brick and shifting priorities. One of the most telling signs is the state of the legendary drainage system. In these later levels, the carefully laid brick channels show clear signs of poor maintenance. Some drains became clogged and were simply abandoned, left to silt up, while new, shallower channels were haphazardly dug nearby. The stone slabs that once neatly covered the sewers are found broken or missing. This neglect of the very system that guaranteed public health speaks volumes. It suggests the municipal authority, that once powerful engine of coordination, was losing its grip. The specialized knowledge and organized labor required to maintain this complex infrastructure were no longer being marshaled effectively. Inside the homes, another story of strain unfolds. The spacious courtyard houses, designed for extended families, began to be subdivided. Brick walls were hastily thrown up, partitioning large rooms into smaller, cramped living spaces. What was once a single, comfortable residence for one family might now house 3 or 4. This points to significant economic and social pressure. Perhaps the population was growing without a corresponding increase in wealth or resources. Maybe families were consolidating out of necessity, pooling their diminishing means. The architectural vision of privacy and dignity was giving way to the pressing need for basic shelter. Most strikingly, the sacred order of the streets themselves began to break down. In the wide, straight thoroughfares that were the pride of the city, archaeologists find evidence of makeshift, crude structures built directly on the pavement. These were flimsy huts of sun-dried mud brick or reused materials, a stark contrast to the fine, fired brick buildings that lined the blocks. This period is often called the squatter phase. It represents a fundamental breakdown of the urban contract. The authority that once prevented anyone from obstructing the public way was gone. The collective commitment to the plan, to the flow and function of the city, had fragmented. People were now solving immediate problems in an ad way, encroaching on the shared space that had once symbolized their unity. This was not an invasion from the outside, but a decay from within. The system was not shattered, it was fraying. The standard of living, so remarkably high for its time, was visibly declining. The brilliant machine of the city was still running, but its parts were wearing down, its operators were distracted, and its fuel was running low. This internal weakening made the civilization profoundly vulnerable. It set the stage for a final act where external pressures would meet a society already struggling to maintain its own intricate design. The perfect balance they had engineered for so long was tipping, and the forces that would ultimately push it over were not of their making, but of a changing world itself. The civilization's perfect balance depended on a river's predictable rhythm. For centuries, The Indus and its sister waterways provided a lifeblood of fresh water and fertile silt, the foundation upon which the entire agricultural and urban system was built. But geological and climatic studies now suggest this foundation began to shift. One of the most compelling theories points to a slow, catastrophic change in the river system itself. The mighty Indus, or key tributaries like the river that fed many settlements, may have gradually changed course. This could have been caused by distant tectonic uplift, subtly tilting the land, or by the natural process of siltation, where the riverbed builds up so high that the water eventually spills over into a new channel. Imagine the consequence for a city whose wells, baths, and irrigation canals were engineered for a specific water source. If the river crept miles away, their entire hydraulic masterpiece, from the grand reservoirs to the humble neighborhood well, would slowly become a network of dry, useless trenches. The life-giving water would simply no longer be there. At the same time, a separate but related threat emerged from the skies. Analysis of ancient ocean sediments and cave formations reveals a troubling pattern, a weakening of the monsoon rains that watered the interior plains. This was not a single bad season, but a centuries-long trend toward aridity. The green, forested landscape of their early days gradually gave way to a drier, more fragile environment. The double blow was devastating. A shifting river would cripple direct water access and irrigation, while failing rains would parch the broader landscape, killing crops and depleting groundwater. Their brilliant adaptation to a specific, generous environment became a liability when that environment changed. The vast grain surpluses stored in the citadels would have dwindled as harvests failed year after year. Famine, or at least severe and persistent scarcity, becomes a grim possibility in this scenario. The social contract, so dependent on a reliable food supply managed by a trusted authority, would have strained to the breaking point. Why maintain a city's perfect drains when the wells are dry and the granaries are empty? The response was likely not a sudden, panicked exodus, but a slow, heartbreaking dispersal. Families and whole communities, facing the relentless hardship of drought and failing fields, would have made the pragmatic choice to leave. They may have splintered into smaller groups, migrating to more reliable water sources, reverting to a more mobile, pastoral way of life that their urban ancestors had transcended a millennium before. The cities were not destroyed, they were simply left behind, room by room, street by street, as the people who built them walked away from a masterpiece that the world itself had made obsolete. The archaeological layers tell a story of quiet retreat. As the environmental pressures mounted, the grand, unified vision of the Indus Valley began to fracture into countless smaller, more local solutions. This was not a sudden societal collapse, but a protracted process of adaptation, where communities made difficult choices to survive in a changing world. One clear response was a movement towards smaller, more manageable settlements. People began to leave the great cities, not all at once, but in a steady trickle, seeking out pockets of land where water was still reliable, or where pastoral herding offered a more resilient way of life. New, smaller villages sprang up, often in the foothills or along different river courses, reflecting a strategic shift away from the vulnerable, centralized urban model. In some of the old cities, we see signs of desperate adaptation within the crumbling framework. There is evidence of wells being dug deeper, a last attempt to chase a retreating water table. But these were individual, stopgap measures, not the coordinated municipal projects of the past. The scale of ambition had shrunk from citywide planning to household-level survival. With this dispersal came a profound simplification of material culture. The exquisite, standardized craftsmanship that had defined the civilization for centuries began to fade. The finely drilled carnelian beads, the intricately carved seals, the perfectly weighted chert cubes, these hallmarks of a complex, integrated economy become rarer. Pottery styles grew more regional and less refined. It was as if the shared language of objects, the one that had unified a continent, was slowly being forgotten, replaced by local dialects. This suggests a fragmentation of the trade networks and the specialized knowledge systems that sustained them. When a master beadmaker can no longer find a market for his finest work, or when the Guild of Surveyors no longer has a city to plan, that intricate web of professions begins to unravel. The knowledge itself, once passed down through generations in bustling workshops, risks being lost. This raises a poignant question about social cohesion. Did the shared identity that built the Great Bath and maintained the drains hold firm in the face of scarcity, or did it fracture under the strain? The archaeological record shows little evidence of widespread conflict or violence in this period, no sacked cities or mass burials. Instead, it points to a gradual loss of unity, a quiet drifting apart. The social contract, so brilliantly engineered around collective infrastructure, may have simply become too costly to uphold when the system it supported was failing. Trust in the old ways, in the authority that managed the granaries and the water, would have eroded as those systems ceased to function. The grand urban experiment was not overthrown. It was patiently, sorrowfully, dismantled from within, piece by piece, as people turned their attention from maintaining a civilization to securing a future for their families. The story shifts from a society building a perfect machine to communities learning, once again, how to live with an imperfect and changing world. For decades, a dramatic story filled the silence of the abandoned cities. The dominant explanation for their end was a sweeping, violent conquest by nomadic warriors from the northwest, a people known as the Aryans. This narrative, drawn largely from interpretations of later Vedic texts composed centuries after the Indus cities fell, painted a picture of clash and subjugation. Of light-skinned invaders on chariots overwhelming a dark-skinned, urban people. It was a compelling tale that seemed to explain a sudden cultural replacement. Yet, as archaeological methods grew more precise, this story of cataclysmic invasion began to crumble under the weight of evidence, or more accurately, the lack of it. The search for proof of a single, civilization-ending war at sites like Harappa has yielded surprisingly little. There are no layers of widespread ash from citywide fires, no mass burials of individuals with traumatic injuries, no streets littered with the weapons of a final, desperate stand. What violence is found appears isolated, not systematic. The famous massacre layer at, once cited as evidence, is now viewed more critically by most scholars. The scattered remains found there could just as likely result from natural flooding, later burial practices, or small-scale local conflict rather than a coordinated military campaign. This absence is deafening. If a wave of invaders had systematically toppled such a vast and wealthy civilization, the archaeological signature would be unmistakable and profound. Instead, the record speaks of gradual decay, not sudden destruction. This does not mean the period was entirely peaceful. Cultural change was certainly happening, and some conflict likely occurred as communities competed for dwindling resources in a tightening environment. But these were skirmishes and pressures, not an organized foreign blitzkrieg that explains the civilization's full and final dissolution. The shift away from the invasion theory represents a major maturation in our understanding. It moves the focus from a simplistic story of us versus them to a far more complex and human narrative. It asks us to look inward at the vulnerabilities of even the most brilliant systems, and outward at the slow, powerful forces of a changing climate. The end of the Indus Valley Civilization appears less like a murder and more like a fading, a complex unraveling where environmental hardship strained social bonds, disrupted economic networks, and ultimately made their magnificent urban blueprint impossible to sustain. By setting aside the myth of the conquering horde, we are forced to engage with a deeper, more challenging truth, that sometimes civilizations are not murdered. They simply exhaust their relationship with the world that created them. The ruins of hold no ash from a great fire, no shattered gates from a final siege. Their story ends not with a bang, but with a long, quiet sigh. To say the Indus Valley Civilization fell is to imagine a structure collapsing in a single, thunderous moment. The truth is far more subtle, and in many ways more haunting. It was a slow vanishing, a transformation so gradual that those living through its later years may not have even recognized they were witnessing an ending. This was not the dramatic fall of an empire, but the prolonged fading of a brilliant, complex system. Over the course of 2 or 3 centuries, the magnificent order simply dissolved. The great cities were not sacked by invaders. They were patiently abandoned, brick by brick, home by home, as people made the pragmatic choice to leave. Imagine a neighborhood where, over many years, families gradually move away. One house is sealed up, its courtyard falling silent. Then another. Weeds begin to push through the seams in the brickwork. A once busy street sees fewer and fewer footsteps, until one day there are none at all. This is the image the archaeology paints, a depopulation so slow it feels less like a catastrophe and more like a collective decision to seek a different path. The people did not vanish from the earth, they dispersed. They moved out from the grand, failing urban centers into the surrounding countryside, forming smaller, more manageable villages. Others may have adopted more mobile, pastoral lifestyles, herding animals across landscapes that could no longer support vast, stationary fields of grain. This was a strategic retreat from complexity, a return to simpler, more resilient forms of social organization. With this dispersal, the very glue that held the civilization together dissolved. The centralized authority that could command the maintenance of a citywide drain or the restocking of a citadel granary lost its purpose and its power. The specialized guilds of surveyors, engineers, and beadmakers found their knowledge was no longer in demand. The meticulous standards for brick size and weight, maintained for over a millennium, began to be forgotten. The shared language of objects and measures, which had unified a continent, fragmented into local dialects. The knowledge to maintain the great machine was not stolen or destroyed. It was simply allowed to fade from memory because the machine itself was no longer functioning. What remains for us to find, then, are not the scars of a violent end, but the echoes of a quiet departure. The silent streets and empty homes are monuments to a different kind of historical truth, that sometimes the most profound change is not a dramatic collapse, but a gentle, relentless fading away. This reframing invites a deeper question, not what conquered them, but what they became. For if the people did not disappear, where did their legacy go? And how did the seeds of their world take root in the soil of the future? The true loss was not in the silent streets, but in the silent minds. With the dispersal of the people came the dissolution of a shared intellectual world, a cultural recession that erased a millennium of accumulated knowledge almost completely. The most visible casualty was their elegant script, those finely carved symbols on seals and pottery, which had conveyed ownership, origin, and identity across a vast commercial network, ceased to be written. The knowledge of how to form the characters and more importantly, how to read them, faded away within a few generations. It was not an act of censorship, but a quiet forgetting. When there were no longer centralized warehouses needing seals, no long-distance contracts requiring authentication, the practical need for the script evaporated, and with it, the professional scribes who held its secrets. This loss is profound. It means we have no names, no poetry, no laws, no merchant's ledger, no voice from the people themselves to tell us who they were or what they believed. They are a civilization viewed forever through a thick pane of glass, their inner lives muted and indistinct. The economic and technical frameworks that enabled their unity suffered the same fate. The exquisite system of standardized weights, those perfectly calibrated chert cubes, fell out of use. The universal language of measure that allowed a merchant to trade fairly with a partner in Harappa, fragmented into local, improvised systems. This collapse of metrological harmony signaled the end of the integrated economic zone. The long-distance trade routes that brought lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian from Gujarat withered. The bustling docks fell quiet, and the knowledge of distant markets, sailing seasons, and foreign customs was lost. The artistic traditions that flourished under this stability also vanished. The distinctive style of seal carving, with its iconic unicorn bulls and intricate script, was not continued. The technical skill for drilling long, perfect holes through hard stone beads, a hallmark of Indus craftsmanship, declined dramatically. A vast, informal library of specialized knowledge, from hydraulic engineering and urban surveying to metallurgical formulas and textile dyeing techniques, was scattered to the winds. This was not a single burning of a library, but a slow, pervasive dimming of countless lights. The consequence was a historical gap, a deep chasm in the memory of the Indian subcontinent. When new urban cultures began to emerge centuries later, they did so with no apparent memory of the grid-patterned cities that had once thrived there. The successors built in different ways, with different priorities, seemingly starting from a different baseline. This loss separates the Indus Valley from its geographical heirs, creating a mystery that later myths and epics never sought to explain. The silent departure of this civilization left a vacuum, not just of people, but of possibility. It meant that every innovation, from city planning to large-scale sanitation, would have to be reinvented independently, centuries or even later. The echo of their disappearance is not just in the ruins they left behind, but in the silence that followed, a reminder of how fragile the threads of collective knowledge can be, and how a world can recede into shadow not with a roar, but with the quiet, final turning of a page. Their silent streets now whisper directly to our own congested cities. 4,000 years after the last brick was laid, the Indus Valley offers a startlingly modern critique of urban life, posing a quiet question to our age of sprawl and inequality. Their foundational principles, born from necessity, echo with uncanny relevance today. Take the simple, elegant grid. While modern planners often debate its merits, the Indus example demonstrates its timeless virtue for clarity, efficiency, and democratic access. Their wide, straight streets were not just for aesthetics, they were tools for predictable movement, fair trade, and social cohesion, ensuring no district was isolated or disadvantaged by a confusing maze of alleys. This logic underpins the most livable neighborhoods in our world today, where walkability and clear navigation foster community and economic vitality. Then there is the matter of what lies beneath. Their investment in a comprehensive, city-wide sanitation system was a monumental commitment to public health that dwarfed the priorities of their contemporaries. In an era where many global cities still struggle with inadequate waste management and waterborne illness, The Indus choice to prioritize invisible infrastructure over visible monuments feels like a profound lesson in civic foresight. They understood that a city's greatness is measured not by its tallest tower, but by the health of its most vulnerable resident. Their zoning of industrial activity away from residential areas speaks directly to modern environmental justice concerns, proactively separating pollution from living spaces to safeguard community well-being. Perhaps their most provocative legacy, however, is their apparent approach to housing. The archaeological record suggests a society that provided a remarkable baseline of dignity, with access to clean water and basic sanitation cut across social lines. While not a utopia of perfect equality, the absence of sprawling slums alongside palatial estates stands in stark contrast to the extreme urban inequalities that define many modern megacities. Their model implies that a functional, thriving city cannot be built upon a foundation of radical disparity. This is not to say we should replicate their blueprint brick for brick. Our challenges of scale, technology, and social complexity are vastly different. Yet their civilization serves as a powerful testament to an ancient, achievable ideal, that urban planning can be an act of profound social care. It reminds us that the core goals of a city, to provide safety, health, opportunity, and a sense of shared belonging, are timeless. In their focus on collective well-being over individual glorification, they present a quiet alternative to the narrative of urban history, one where the greatest monument is a thriving, healthy community itself. Their vanished world ultimately asks us to consider what we are building for, and for whom, challenging us to look beyond the skyline and remember that the true heart of a city has always been its people. The silent cities are not done telling their story. While we have pieced together a remarkable portrait from bricks and drains, the most exciting chapters may still lie buried, waiting for the right moment to be read. This is not a closed case, but an ongoing investigation, one that has entered a thrilling new era powered by technology that would seem like magic to the original builders. Today, archaeologists are no longer limited to the slow work of trowels and brushes alone. They now peer into the earth without digging a single hole, using tools like ground-penetrating radar that sends pulses into the soil, revealing the ghostly outlines of walls, streets, and foundations hidden deep beneath farmers' fields and modern villages. From space, satellite imagery analyzes subtle variations in vegetation and soil moisture, hinting at the buried geometry of ancient settlements invisible from the ground. This is how we are beginning to map the true, sprawling extent of this civilization, finding that what we once thought were isolated major cities were actually part of a dense network of towns and villages, all connected by that shared culture of order. One of the most promising frontiers lies in the search for the lost rivers. The Great River System, now a dry seasonal stream, is believed by many to have been the lifeblood of hundreds of Indus settlements. By studying ancient sediment patterns and using satellite data to trace its channels, researchers are identifying promising sites along its forgotten banks, places where entire cities may be preserved, waiting to tell us about the communities that thrived there before the waters vanished. This work has led to intensified exploration at sites like in India, now understood to be one of the largest Indus Valley cities, even larger than. Excavations here are ongoing, and each season's work has the potential to rewrite our understanding. A newly uncovered neighborhood or a single, perfectly preserved seal from an undisturbed layer could answer questions that have haunted us for a century. How were the very first city plans drafted? What did their earliest governance look like? What stories did they tell that never made it onto their seals? Every carefully sifted layer of soil is a page in a manuscript we are still learning to read. Perhaps most tantalizing is the prospect of underwater archaeology. If key settlements were abandoned due to shifting river courses, their remains might lie submerged under silt or modern water tables. The technology to explore these drowned landscapes is advancing, holding the promise of finding organic materials that never survive in dry ground, wooden tools, textiles, or even those elusive written records on perishable materials. This continuous search transforms the Indus Valley from a static historical fact into a living mystery. It is a reminder that our knowledge is provisional, always subject to the next discovery. The silent planners of 4,000 years ago built their cities to last, and in their enduring bricks, they left a puzzle that each new generation is invited to solve, ensuring their story is never truly finished. These small, carved stones are the closest we can come to holding a conversation with the past. Thousands of steatite seals, each no larger than a postage stamp, have been recovered from the ruins of Indus Valley cities. They are cool to the touch, their surfaces worn smooth by time, and on each one, a tiny world is etched in astonishing detail. The most common image by far is a mysterious, powerful creature scholars call the unicorn bull. It stands in profile, a single horn curving from its forehead, its body often depicted with a ritual object or a manger before it. This was not a real animal, but a potent symbol, repeated so often it must have been a cornerstone of their shared identity, a kind of cultural emblem recognized from one end of the civilization to the other. Other seals show a rich bestiary, elephants with their trunks raised, majestic tigers, rhinoceroses, and crocodiles, all rendered with a careful, observant eye that suggests deep familiarity and perhaps reverence for the natural world. Then there are the rarer, more enigmatic scenes, human-like figures seated in postures resembling yoga, surrounded by animals, hinting at possible deities or revered teachers. Above every image runs the elegant, frustrating script, a line of precise, geometric symbols that we can see but cannot hear. This script is not random, its signs are standardized and used consistently, but the inscriptions are always brief, usually just 4 or 5 characters. This brevity is what keeps their meaning locked away, a code without a key. Were these names, titles, or the addresses of merchant houses? The seals themselves, often pierced with a hole, were clearly meant to be worn or carried. Pressed into soft clay or wax, they would leave a distinctive impression, a signature in miniature. This practical use points strongly to a primary function in trade and administration. A bale of cotton cloth or a jar of oil sealed with a distinctive unicorn bull, and a line of script would have been a certified package, guaranteeing its origin, quality, or ownership as it traveled along those vast trade routes. The seal was a tool of trust in a complex economy, a way of doing business across great distances without face-to-face contact. Yet, to reduce them to mere economic tokens feels incomplete. The care in their craftsmanship, the choice of potent animal symbols, and their discovery in what seemed to be domestic contexts suggest they were more than bureaucratic stamps. They may have served as amulets, objects of personal protection and identity, worn by individuals as a mark of their profession, their family lineage, or their spiritual allegiance. The unicorn bull on your seal was not just a logo, it might have been your guardian, your social badge, and your commercial trademark all at once. This fusion of the practical and the symbolic is quintessentially Indus. Their artistry was never separate from function. In these tiny artifacts, we see the entire civilization in microcosm, a culture that expressed its beliefs, managed its economy, and navigated its social world through a rich, shared visual language. While the script above the images remains silent, the symbols themselves speak volumes about a society that found order and meaning in the natural world, and that carried the emblems of that order with them. Close to their person, in the daily flow of life and commerce, they created a symbolic universe so cohesive that a single image of a mythical bull could resonate across a continent, binding merchant to farmer, city dweller to artisan, in a silent, understood pact. This visual cohesion makes the eventual fragmentation of their world all the more poignant, for when the trade networks faded and the cities emptied, this shared symbolic language, like their script, slowly faded from memory, leaving behind only these beautiful, silent stones as puzzles for our hands. For over a century, the people of the Indus Valley were known only by the things they left behind. We could measure their bricks, walk their streets, and admire their seals, but the individuals themselves remained shadows, their faces and stories lost to time. Who were the builders of this silent world? Recent breakthroughs in science are finally allowing us to meet them, not through artifacts, but through the very substance of their being. Advances in ancient DNA analysis are opening a direct window into the past, transforming anonymous skeletons into individuals with a biological story to tell. The most revealing evidence comes from a site like one of the civilization's largest cities. Here, scientists successfully extracted genetic material from the remains of individuals who lived and died in that urban landscape. The results are reshaping our understanding in profound ways. The DNA reveals that the people of the Indus Valley were not newcomers or invaders to the region. Their primary ancestry was deeply local, tracing back to the ancient hunter-gatherer populations who had inhabited the Indian subcontinent for thousands of years before the first city was ever planned. They were a distinct genetic group, a population that had evolved in that specific landscape, suggesting their civilization was a homegrown flowering, an indigenous innovation born from the land itself. This finding quietly dismantles an old and persistent historical narrative, the idea of a complete population replacement by outside groups. The genetic story shows continuity, not a clean break. The research goes further, tracing the threads of this ancient ancestry forward through time. The studies indicate that the people of the Indus Valley made significant and lasting contributions to the genetic makeup of modern South Asian populations. Their biological legacy is woven into the fabric of life in the region today. This connection is powerful. It means the silent planners are not a completely vanished people, but ancestors. Their genetic story did not end with the abandonment of their cities. It flowed into new streams of history, adapting and persisting. This biological evidence adds a deeply personal dimension to the ruins. It transforms the abstract concept of a lost civilization into a story about specific human communities. Those perfectly laid bricks were handled by individuals whose biological relatives might walk the streets of Pakistan or India today. The care they put into their drainage systems and wide streets was an investment in the health and future of their own families, their own descendants. This connection makes their achievements feel more intimate and their disappearance more poignant. It reminds us that history is not just about structures and systems, but about people, about the enduring links of ancestry that tie our present to a past we are only beginning to hear speak. Their genetic legacy was woven into a landscape of staggering scale. The influence of this civilization stretched far beyond the walls of Harappa, creating a cultural tapestry that covered an area of over 1 million square kilometers, a region larger than modern France, Spain, and Germany combined. This was not an empire in the traditional sense, held together by military force, but a vast and interconnected culture zone. A shared way of life that resonated from the shores of the Arabian Sea to the snow-fed foothills of the Himalayas. To the south, on the coast of modern Gujarat, lay a vital port city that reveals their mastery of maritime trade. Archaeologists uncovered a massive, brick-lined dockyard here, an engineered basin with lock gates to control water levels, allowing boats to enter and exit with the tides regardless of the season. This was not a simple beach landing, but a sophisticated piece of hydraulic architecture designed for high-volume commerce. From this port, goods like cotton cloth, carved beads, and ivory would have been loaded onto ships bound for Mesopotamia, while imports like copper and exotic woods arrived. Moving north, the landscape shifts to the fertile plains of the Punjab and Sindh, the civilization's densely populated heartland. Here, the major metropolitan centers like Harappa and thrived, their grand urban plans replicated in smaller but equally orderly towns which even had a separate fortified citadel and a lower town with the characteristic grid. Further north still, settlements climbed into the foothills, acting as manufacturing centers and trading posts that connected the urban core to sources of precious materials like timber and metals from the mountains. To the east, their cultural footprint extended toward the edges of the Ganges Plain, showing an adaptation to different river systems and ecologies. What unified this immense and geographically diverse region was a powerful, shared material culture. A farmer in a village near the coast, a merchant in a northern town, and an administrator in a major city all understood the same system. They used bricks made to the same 4:2:1 ratio. They conducted trade with the same standardized stone weights. They carved seals with the same symbolic animals and script. They built their settlements, whether large or small, with a clear concern for order, often orienting streets to the cardinal directions and incorporating basic drainage. This consistency is the true marvel. It speaks to the magnetic appeal and practical success of their societal model. A community hundreds of miles from the nearest great city could choose to adopt these planning principles and material standards because they simply worked. They facilitated trade, promoted health, and created a predictable, manageable living environment. The civilization's greatest achievement was not conquering this vast territory with an army, but convincing it, through the undeniable benefits of a well-ordered life, to join a common project. The silent language of their bricks and weights was so persuasive that it created a unity of culture across a subcontinent, a quiet consensus that endured for centuries. Proving that the most powerful force for cohesion is not the sword, but a better way to build a home. The morning sun would have warmed the bricks of a craftsman's workshop, its light falling on a workbench scattered with tools. Here, a master seal carver selects a smooth piece of steatite, a soft gray stone. He begins with a copper chisel, sketching the outline of a powerful unicorn bull, its single horn curving proudly. The air fills with the soft, rhythmic scratch of his work, a sound of concentrated creation. Nearby, a bow drill spins, its tip coated in abrasive sand, patiently boring a hole through a tiny carnelian bead. This is not just labor. It is the application of a deep, inherited knowledge, turning raw materials into objects of identity and trade that will travel farther than the maker ever will. Across the city, in a shaded market square, the day's commerce hums to life. A merchant arranges his goods on a woven mat, baskets of wheat and lentils beside polished stone weights. A customer approaches, interested in a length of finely woven cotton cloth. The transaction is swift and assured. The merchant places a polished chert cube on one pan of a simple balance scale, adding smaller weights until equilibrium is found. No argument, no haggling over measures. The standardized weights, identical to those used in workshops 500 miles away, create a silent language of trust. This simple act of fair exchange is a cornerstone of the entire civilization, a daily ritual that reinforces the social contract. In a sun-drenched courtyard, the sounds of family life rise from the baked brick walls. A child crouches in a corner, pushing a small clay cart with wooden wheels, a toy found in ruins that speaks of universal childhood joy. From an adjacent room comes the soft slap of hands kneading dough, and the scent of baking flatbread mingles with the air. The homemaker's most vital task is a short walk away, to the neighborhood well. She lowers a rope-tied pot into the cool darkness, drawing up clean water for drinking, cooking, and washing. This well is not a luxury, but a guaranteed amenity, a node in the city's decentralized life support system that places a fundamental resource within steps of every home. As evening approaches, the rhythms shift. The craftsman cleans his tools, the merchant packs his unsold wares. The wide streets, designed for efficient flow, now serve a different purpose, guiding people home. Families gather in their private courtyards, the architectural heart of each dwelling, sharing a meal under the emerging stars. The city's great silence, which we perceive today, was not a feature of its life. It was filled instead with this layered symphony, the chatter of markets, the laughter of children, the quiet conversations of families, and the ever-present, reassuring draw of water from a deep, cool well. To imagine these moments is to bridge the vast gap between the silent ruins we excavate and the vibrant, breathing society that built them. It transforms anonymous planners into fathers and mothers, merchants and artists, individuals who sought order not as an abstract ideal, but as the foundation for a safe, healthy, and meaningful daily life. This tangible humanity makes their ultimate departure from these well-built homes not just a historical event, but a deeply human story of loss. The most profound statement the Indus Valley ever made was one of deliberate silence. Across 1,000 years of flourishing, they never carved their leaders' names in towering stone or raised a pyramid to house a god-king's remains. This absence is not a gap in the record, it is the record itself. It forms the civilization's ultimate mystery and its most radical proposition. In a world where every other ancient society shouted its power and piety toward the heavens, the Indus Valley spoke in a different voice. One that whispered through the quiet efficiency of a well-laid brick and the gentle flow of clean water. Their monument was not a singular, awe-inspiring object, but a living, breathing system, the city itself, designed for the collective well-being of every inhabitant. This represents a breathtaking inversion of ancient values. While Egypt mobilized generations to build tombs for a single divine ruler, and Mesopotamia erected ziggurats that served as bridges for priests to commune with deities, the Indus people invested that same staggering level of coordination into something profoundly democratic. They built for the many, not the one. The wide streets were their grand processional avenues, the hundreds of identical wells were their offering pools, and the network of drains was their sacred text, a scripture of public health written in clay and bitumen. This choice challenges a deep-seated assumption in how we view history, the idea that complex civilization inevitably requires a charismatic, egocentric ruler at its apex. Someone whose personal glory is the engine and the emblem of societal achievement. The Indus Valley presents a powerful counter-narrative. It suggests that social complexity can be driven by a shared ethic, by a collective commitment to an orderly, healthy, and dignified way of life. Authority here seems to have been embedded in the systems, in the unbreakable rules of brick ratios and weight standards, rather than in the personality of a monarch. Their governance, whether a council of elders, a guild of engineers, or a mercantile board, derived its legitimacy not from divine mandate or military conquest, but from its ability to deliver tangible, universal benefits, clean water, predictable trade, and a home with a private courtyard. This makes their legacy not just an archaeological wonder, but a philosophical provocation. It asks us to consider what civilization is truly for. Is its highest purpose to create eternal testaments to individual power, or is it to engineer a society where the greatest number of people can live in safety, health, and mutual respect? The silent streets of do not answer this question for us, but they ensure we can never stop asking it. In their quiet refusal to glorify a single name, they glorified an entire idea, the idea that a society's greatest achievement can be the quality of life it provides for its people. That silent, enduring idea is their most monumental gift to history, a blueprint not just for a city, but for a different kind of human possibility. Their silent blueprint now echoes with a question for our own crowded century. The Indus Valley Civilization presents a haunting vision of what could have been, a society that mastered urban planning for the collective benefit, only to be undone by the very environment it so skillfully managed. Its grid streets and covered drains stand as silent witnesses to a profound level of ancient ingenuity and social organization, a testament to a path not taken in the long story of human cities. While its script remains unread and its governing principles debated, these ruins compel us to rethink the very pathways of history. They challenge the narrative that civilization must always be built on the backs of the many for the glory of the few. Here, for a fleeting millennium, a different model thrived, one where the monument was not a tomb but a well, where power was expressed not in conquest but in coordination. Their disappearance is a sobering lesson in the fragility of even the most brilliantly engineered systems. They built a world in perfect balance with a specific climate, and when that climate shifted, their entire societal machine, for all its sophistication, could not adapt quickly enough. This is where their story speaks directly to us. What lessons does this vanished world hold for our own cities, now facing unprecedented climate challenges and deep social inequality? The parallels are unsettling. Like the Indus planners, we have built immense, complex urban systems dependent on predictable environmental conditions. Our own grids, our own water and food networks are being tested by a changing world. Their experience whispers a warning about the perils of inflexibility, of designing for a world that may not remain static. Yet, their legacy is not one of despair, but of profound inspiration. They demonstrated that a society can choose to prioritize public health, dignified housing, and fair commerce as its highest ideals. They proved that urban life can be an expression of mutual care rather than concentrated power. As we continue to unearth their secrets with satellite imagery and ancient DNA, each discovery adds another piece to their puzzle. Let the story of the Indus remind us that the quest for order, community, and a healthy life in a well-planned space is an enduring human aspiration. Their silent cities are not just relics, they are a mirror, asking us to consider what we are building today and for whom. If you found this journey into a lost world fascinating, subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear your thoughts on what you believe happened to the Indus people, so share them in the comments below.